read aloud. This week we are focusing on retelling and using story structure. So as I'm reading Mr. Tanen'S Tie Trouble, I want you to be thinking about how are you going to retell the story using story structure. So that means that setting, the main characters, the problem, the solution, and what's happening at the beginning and middle and end of this story. So Mr. Tanen'S Tie Trouble. It was very early when Mr. Tanen unlocked the door to the school. He had a lot to do. This was the first day back after winter vacation. As principal of Lyndhurst School, his job was to get everything ready before the children arrived. He clicked on all the classroom lights. Ooh, fresh paint. Turned up the heat. Ah, nice and warm at last. And stocked the fridge with milk. Brr, the fridge is fixed. Finally, he entered his office. He opened his closet door and smiled. Ties, lots of ties, tumbled out. Mr. Tanen was known and loved for his wild and crazy tie collection. He had 975 ties. He wore a different one for every occasion, activity, or mood. He slipped on his new donut and Danish tie and poured himself a cup of coffee. Mr. Tanen arranged his ties for the day. The back to jail tie for the teacher's meeting, the school bus tie to greet the kids, and the pizza tie for lunch. Then he searched until he found the swing and slide tie. He was very excited. Today he would announce that the school had saved enough money to install a wonderful new playground. The children deserved it. They had collected cans and held bake sales to add money to the playground fund. Just then the phone rang. It was Mr. Apple from the school department. Mr. Tanen, welcome back, said Mr. Apple. I've been working on the school budget. Everything that needed fixing was fixed over vacation. I've been noticing all morning, said Mr. Tanen, fresh paint, steaming heat, and a cold refrigerator. Thank you so much, Mr. Apple. Don't thank me yet, said Mr. Apple. I just received the bills. We are out of money. The playground will have to wait. Oh no, Mr. Apple. Can't you find the money somewhere else, begged Mr. Tanen. What am I going to tell the kids? You'll have to think of something, said Mr. Apple. I'm sorry, Mr. Tanen. I wish I could I wish I could tell you that our bank account is as full as your tie closet. Mr. Tanen sadly hung up the phone and gazed out at the broken down playground. He heard a click-clank. He looked up to see Kaylee and Alex lugging in a big jar filled with money. Here it is, $148.29 for the playground fund, said Kaylee proudly. New playground, here we come, cheered Alex. Mr. Tanen didn't know what to say. After school, Mr. Tanen sat in his office staring at the jar. He sighed. Now I'm in a real pickle. This is not enough money for a playground. The kids will be so disappointed. Mr. Apple's words floated around in his head. The playground will have to wait. You'll think of something. I wish our bank account was as full as your tie closet. As full as my tie closet, repeated Mr. Tanen. He jumped up, opened the closet, and shouted, That's it, my ties! Lyndhurst School will have a new playground. The next day, the entire town was plastered with signs. Mr. Tanen's Tie Auction, Saturday at 7 p.m. at Lyndhurst School. A tie for any occasion. All ties must go. Mrs. Sweet Apple noticed the sign on the grocery store window. She called her husband Mr. Apple. Why is Mr. Tanen selling all his ties? Has he gone crazy? Mr. Apple told her about the school budget and the playground money. The town was buzzing all day. Mrs. Sweet Apple called the bakery, who called Chloe at the cleaners, who called Mr. Demi the dentist. It went on until even Zach the night watchman and the zoo got the word. Mr. Tanen is selling his ties. On Saturday, the whole town showed up for the auction. Monsieur Bijou started the bidding. I'll give you $50 for the donut and the Danish tie. Lolly, the librarian, bought the book tie. Mr. Demi was a proud new owner of the toothbrush tie. Kaylee handed over her entire piggy bank for the hot dog tie. Mrs. Sweet Apple just had to have the wedding bells tie, and of course Mr. Apple chuckled as he paid quite a bit of cash for the crab apple tie. The auction was a huge success. Every tie was sold except one. Mr. Tannen couldn't part with his beloved blue ribbon tie. It was a present from Mr. Apple for being a great principal. He looked out at a sea of townspeople all wearing his tie. Thank you all. I have always taught my students, the more you give, the more you get. With this money, the Lyndhurst School will have a new playground. Mr. Tannen swallowed hard. My ties now belong to the town. Wear them proudly. And throughout the spring, that's just what everyone did. But sometimes Mr. Tannen would forget his closet was empty. He would open it to get a tie, and with a tinge of sadness, he would remember he only had one tie, and he was wearing it. Then he'd look outside at the playground being built. You have to give to get, he thought. Soon it was opening day at the new playground. Mr. Tannen had invited the whole town to the ribbon-cutting ceremony. He tucked his speech in his pocket, grabbed his special scissors, and adjusted his tie. He wished he had on his official ribbon-cutting tie. The schoolyard was overflowing with people. Mr. Tannen made his way through the crowd. Then he saw it. The playground was tied in a giant ribbon made from Mr. Tanen's ties. Mrs. Sweet Apple and Mr. Apple were at the microphone. Mr. Tannen, you have taught us all. The more you give, the more you get, said Mrs. Sweet Apple. You have given us a playground. We are giving you back your ties. With that, Mr. Apple untied the tie ribbon and announced, Mr. Tanen's playground is now open. Mr. Tannen and his ties were together again. He slipped on his swing and slide tie and smiled. So hopefully you enjoyed Mr. Tanen's Tie Trouble. Today, in your packet that your mom or dad picked up last week, you have an activity that you get to cut out, and it says Mr. Tanen's Tie Trouble, and it asks you to use story structure to retell this story. So after you cut out your ties, in it, the first tie, it asks you to tell what the setting is. So remember, the setting is where the story takes place, using complete sentences on this line, giving where the story takes place, and seeing if you could add some details into your sentence there, and then drawing a picture. The next one is the characters. Who are the main characters? Remember, when we tell who the characters are when we are writing a summary or retelling, we don't need to say every single character in the story, just the main one. So who's the main character or characters? And in each fiction story, there's always some sort of problem, so there's always a conflict. So what was happening in the story? What was the problem or the conflict? So again, not telling every single detail, but giving enough details in your sentence that somebody could pick your ties up here and read them and know enough about what the story is about. Okay. And your last tie right here is the solution of how the story was solved. What happened at the very end? So again, when fiction stories, we know there's always a problem, and if there's a problem, there's always a solution. The story ends somehow. So what was the lesson learned and how did it end? All right, hopefully everyone's off to a great week, and I hope you enjoyed the story, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.